What should you do when the past suddenly returns to your life and threatens everything you are just beginning to build? How do you choose between love and duty, between happiness and the fear of hurting those close to you? This is a story about a woman who dared to run away from herself, a man who was not afraid to fight for his feelings, and a father who had to accept his son's difficult choice. Are you ready to find out how their journey ends? Then listen on. Between the past and the future. Quite unexpectedly, I decided to spend my vacation not at some trendy resort, not on a cruise ship, and not on a Mediterranean beach even though I had the opportunity. By the age of 30, I was fully established in my profession. I graduated from university, immediately got a job at a reputable company as a landscape designer, and in 7 years rose from intern to lead specialist. I bought myself a car, paid off the mortgage on a 2-room apartment without much stress, and lived there with Baxter, a gray mixed-breed cat I had rescued as a kitten one bitter winter. I decided to rest in peace, solitude, and quiet at my grandmother's country house. My grandmother had lived there permanently until her death, after which the house was left unattended. My parents and I were city people and rarely visited, but as a child, I loved spending summers at that very house. Then came my teenage years, high school, university work. My younger sister Amelia also had no desire to deal with gardening. We decided to sell the house, but for now it stood empty. I agreed with my parents that I would hire people to tidy up the house and garden, live there for 2 or 3 weeks, and then the house would be put up for sale. At work, I arranged a vacation, took on a project to work on in the country, quiet, mixing rest with work, but not going to the office and only taking calls from my boss, and only if absolutely necessary. I moved some things, withdrew cash since card payments could be a problem in the village, and strictly instructed my parents not to reveal my whereabouts to anyone. I just wanted to rest alone. The neighbors were typical villagers from whom I bought milk, sour cream, cottage cheese, and eggs. Other groceries were available at the local store. The house next door was uninhabited and locked, but the grass was neatly mowed and gathered into tidy piles. Baxter moved in with me. He wasn't thrilled about country life, preferring the couch or armchair, but didn't protest much, as long as his owner was nearby to pet him and his food bowl was full. For the first 3 days I simply enjoyed myself. Slept as much as I wanted, watched silly comedies, indulged in delicious homemade cottage cheese and sour cream, and didn't even think about opening my project. The cat lay beside me, purring and lulling me into sweet drowsiness. Life was serene and beautiful. On the 4th day my conscience stirred and I decided to do some work. To shake off my laziness, I grabbed a towel and headed to the outdoor shower. I'll make coffee afterward and get to work, I thought. The water in the tank above the shower was quite cool. I squealed but decided not to heat it. I didn't want to bother with the heater, and the cool water was more invigorating. I stood under the spray, squealed loudly again. No one was around and the neighbors were busy with their own chores. Who would be watching or listening to me anyway? Grandma Lena was in the garden behind her house, and her grandchildren had already run off. I wrapped myself in a towel and headed back to the house, not caring much about my appearance, but halfway there I stopped abruptly. I heard men's voices and restrained laughter from the empty lot next door. Luckily, they hadn't noticed me yet, so I tightened my towel and slipped inside. I got dressed and peeked out the window. There was an SUV by the neighbor's gate, and 2 guys were unloading bags and suitcases. They must have arrived while I was in the shower, as I only noticed them now. They carried their things inside, one left and the other stayed. So the neighbors have arrived. I wonder if he's alone or with family. Either way, if he's with a wife and kids, it'll be noisy and hectic. If he's alone, he'll probably try to get acquainted, but I just want to relax. Oh well, time to work. I made coffee, opened my laptop and got to work. Apparently, the 3 days of rest, healthy food and good sleep paid off, because I made great progress in half a day. In the evening, I went outside and sat on the bench to relax and enjoy the cool air. What about my new neighbor? He seemed to be doing something in the house, probably preparing for his family's arrival. I just hoped they wouldn't be noisy and disturb my rest and work. Good evening, neighbor. I jumped, lost in thought about my project and completely disconnected from reality. The guy was leaning on the low fence between our yards, smiling at me in a friendly way. Good evening, neighbor. I echoed his greeting. Let's get acquainted. I'm George. Sophia, are you here on vacation? Or did you buy a summer house? Well, I inherited it from my grandmother, but I bought myself an apartment in a new building. While the house is being finished and renovated, I'll live here. Let my parents have a break from me, or maybe I'll have a break from them, George smiled. And in winter, I'll probably go back to them or rent an apartment. Are you here on vacation? Yes, I got tired of the Canaries and the Maldives. I joked. So I decided. Well, that's great, so we'll be neighbors. By the way, I'm having a housewarming party tonight. And I'm inviting you for a small, modest barbecue. No, George, sorry. I'm not a fan of unfamiliar company, and I value peace and quiet. I'm not just resting here, I'm working too. So you'll have to manage on your own. Sophia, you misunderstood. I wasn't planning a noisy party with guests, music and dancing, and I didn't invite anyone. I don't like loud gatherings either. And tonight I was just going to grill some barbecue for myself, enjoy it in peace, and go to bed. You know, drinking alone is a direct road to alcoholism, I said, half joking, half serious. I know, he replied. So I don't drink alone at all. And I don't overdo it in company either. Everything will be civilized. Barbecue, vegetables, a little light wine. We'll sit, chat, and then I promise to see you home. George smiled. I have my car, I replied in the same tone. Actually, I wanted to work some more, but barbecue sounds so tempting. Can I think about it? Of course. If work wins, I'll just eat both barbecues myself and hold a deadly grudge against you. All right, I smiled. I'll go home for now and we'll see. Of course, in the evening, when the delicious smell of barbecue wafted over from the neighbor's yard, I grabbed a quickly baked apple roll so as not to come empty-handed and went over. Work is work, but I am on vacation. And what's wrong with spending an evening with a nice neighbor over barbecue and light conversation? I certainly wasn't planning any romance, just a neighborly chat, nothing more. I was looking forward to a peaceful rest and unhurried work. All those passions could stay in the past. I must say, while my career, housing, and other material things were going well, my personal life was a mess. My first serious love happened right after high school, when I didn't get enough points to enter university and, on my mother's recommendation, went to work as an assistant manager in a quiet office, to be around people, earn some pocket money, and prepare for next year's entrance exams. The lead specialist and my boss there was Mr. Smith, mature, respectable, fit, with gray at his temples and piercing blue eyes. Married but very charming with strong, capable hands. I fell hopelessly in love with my boss, and he reciprocated. We had a wild, doomed affair. He was my first man and I had no regrets, even though I knew we would never be together. My heart didn't want to let go of such a bittersweet love. Then it ended. My beloved moved to another city with his family, and we never saw each other again. After that, I entered university, studied hard, and closed myself off from love and passion. Only by my third year did I thaw a little, started dating classmates, but it was all light and unserious, just to pass the time. I started earning well, got a car and an apartment, and my bosses valued me highly. I learned to see through men, realizing that many were attracted not so much to me as to my high salary, my own apartment and car. The other extreme, successful men with their own material wealth, didn't want a strong, independent woman by their side and tried to break me to make me dependent. So I focused on work, traveled during vacations, and saw the world. Sometimes, out of boredom, I had light, non-committal flings, which I ended at the first sign of serious intentions. The neighbor seemed nice, with a good sense of humor, well off, and not worried about housing. I even allowed myself to think that maybe we could have a little fling, just to break the routine, since I was going to sell the house by next season and would probably never see George again. We had a lovely evening by the dying fire, talked about life, ate juicy meat that George had prepared, and then drank tea with my apple roll. George was very polite, never hinted at anything more intimate. We sat a little longer, then I went home. I couldn't shake the strange feeling that, although I was sure we hadn't met before, it seemed like I already knew George from somewhere. A couple of days later, I asked my neighbor to help me move a heavy wardrobe, and then we made a fire in my yard, baked potatoes in the ashes and ate them, burning hot and black from the coals, incredibly tasty, taking pictures of our faces smeared with soot, laughing freely and carelessly. Several more times we visited each other on warm summer evenings, sat by the fire, talked about everything, admired the moon and stars. Then there was a trip to the city in my car. George wanted to pick up his car from the service station and asked for help. He could have easily taken the bus, but I wasn't surprised and gladly agreed. We shopped for things not available in the village store, then went to the workshop and from there in 2 cars to a roadside motel with a restaurant, to celebrate the end of the repairs. We bought a bottle of good wine, pretended to forget that we both had to drive. In the end, we finished the wine, had fun, danced, and stayed overnight in the motel in a double room. That night was surprisingly wonderful. We understood each other without words, as if we had lived a long, happy life together. And in the early morning, I realized why George seemed so familiar. I didn't say anything to him, pretended everything was fine, but I needed to go home quickly. Baxter was there, alone, hungry and miserable, and besides, it was time to leave. When I got home, I found an old flash drive in a distant drawer. Found a recording I had long wanted to erase but never could. There I was, an 18-year-old girl, laughing and hugging an elegant, slender man with gray at his temples, who looked exactly like my current neighbor George. Back then, 12 years ago, he had said sadly, "I have a son older than you, kid." And I had cried, hitting him with my weak fists on his chest. Does that matter? But inside I was already cold and I didn't want to admit that he was right. It was late at night and quietly, without turning on the lights, I pulled a suitcase from under the bed, opened it, and started throwing in the essentials. Documents, laptop, some clothes. I put sleepy, grumpy Baxter in his carrier, carefully opened the door. Everything seemed quiet. The neighbor's house was dark. If only George wouldn't wake up. I quietly started the engine, opened the gate. Hurry, hurry home. Tomorrow I would give the keys to my friend and realtor Isla. She would collect and bring the rest of my things and show the house to potential buyers. I would rest at home. Enough of the shadows of the past. I needed to live here and now. I started to drive out. A shadow darted from the street, and a man blocked the exit. I braked sharply and started honking loudly, hysterically, not caring about the quiet night. Tears blurred my eyes. How did George wake up so quickly? Was he watching me? What are you doing in my yard? Let me pass. And what are you doing, leaving in the middle of the night with a suitcase and a cat in a carrier? Are you running away from me? What's it to you? Do you think you own me? Were you spying on me? Sophia, darling, what happened? George suddenly asked quietly. It was so unexpected that I dropped my head on the steering wheel and started crying. Not hysterically, but bitterly and helplessly. He gently opened my door, hugged me, kissed me softly, and tried to calm me. Yes, my love, I was watching. You've been acting strange all day, and I couldn't figure out what happened. You'll understand now and you'll let me go. I took my laptop from my bag, turned it on, and plugged in that very flash drive. Here, 12 years ago. That's me, and that's your father. We loved each other, and then he said, "I have a son older than you, kid." And now, Here you are, his son, not letting me leave. Let me go, George. I won't, he said calmly, almost matter-of-factly. Let's go inside, you can't drive in this state. Have some sweet tea, calm down, take your cat and get some sleep. I'll sit next to you and guard your sleep. Look, the night is turning to dawn. The shadows of the past are fading and disappearing. We have everything ahead of us, and the past is gone with the night. I didn't resist. I had no strength left. Not for explanations, not for tears, not for running away. I just let George take my hand, lead me out of the car, hug me as if I were a little girl who needed peace and protection. We walked into the house in silence. He put the kettle on, poured me strong sweet tea, sat me on the couch and covered me with a blanket. Baxter immediately settled on my lap, purring loudly as if reminding me, "You're not alone." George sat next to me, didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't try to find out the details. He was just there and that was enough. I drank tea, looked out the window where it was already getting light, and felt the pain slowly leaving, the anxiety fading, and with them the shadows of the past dissolving. "Everything will be all right," George said quietly when I finally looked at him. "I'm not my father. I'm me. And things can be different for us." I nodded. For the first time in a long while, I wanted to believe those simple words. Maybe it really was time to let go of the past and allow myself to be happy. Here and now, with this man who simply held my hand and asked for nothing in return. That night, for the first time in many years, I fell asleep peacefully, knowing that there was someone by my side who wouldn't let me run away from myself again. The next day, I woke up late, when the sun was already filling the room with warm light, and Baxter, content and well-fed, was stretched out at my feet. My mind was surprisingly calm, as if someone had carefully packed away all my worries overnight. I remembered the previous night, George, his strong arms, the tea, the silence, and how easy it felt to be with him. I felt a little awkward but also happy. For the first time in a long time, I didn't want to run away. I got up, washed, made coffee, and went out onto the porch. George was already busy in the yard, fixing something by the shed, and when he saw me, he smiled. I waved at him, feeling a quiet happiness spreading inside. Everything was simple and right. "Good morning," I said, coming closer. "Good morning," he replied, wiping his hands on an old rag. "How are you?" "Better than I have in years," I admitted honestly. He nodded and we both fell silent, enjoying this simple, almost family-like morning. Suddenly, I realized I didn't want to go back to the city, didn't want to put on the mask of a strong, independent woman again. Here next to George, I could just be myself. The day passed quietly. We went shopping together, bought groceries, then I helped George in the garden, and in the evening we had a little picnic on the grass. I laughed as he told childhood stories, and he listened to my tales about work and travel. Everything felt so easy, as if we had known each other all our lives. The next day, George said his father was coming to help with some documents for the house and just to visit his son. I felt a pang inside but didn't show it. After all, so many years had passed, and it was unlikely he would recognize me. I had changed, grown up, and we had parted for good back then. "Do you mind if he comes over in the evening?" George asked, looking into my eyes. "Of course not," I smiled, trying to seem calm. "He's your father." All day I caught myself feeling nervous. I remembered what Mr. Smith looked like 11 years ago. The strict suit, silver hair at his temples, piercing eyes. I tried to imagine what he looked like now, and for some reason my heart started beating faster. In the evening, I set the table, baked a pie so as not to greet the guest empty-handed. George left and I was alone, listening to every sound outside. Baxter, sensing my anxiety, didn't leave my side. When I heard a car in the yard, I froze. My heart was pounding so loudly, it seemed everyone could hear it. I heard voices, first George's, then another, deeper one, painfully familiar. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the porch. George entered the yard first, followed by a man in his 60s, tall, fit, with the same gray at his temples and those piercing blue eyes. He stopped when he saw me, and for a moment something like surprise, even confusion, flashed in his gaze. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Dad, meet Sophia, my neighbor," George said, not noticing the tension. "Very nice to meet you," Mr. Smith said quietly, not taking his eyes off me. I nodded, trying to smile, but inside everything tightened. He recognized me. I felt it immediately, by the way he looked at me, by the way his lips trembled. But he said nothing, just politely shook my hand and went inside. The evening passed in a strange, tense atmosphere. We talked about trivial things, George joked. I kept up the conversation, but I constantly felt Mr. Smith's gaze on me. He barely ate, was mostly silent, sometimes asked me about my work, the house, my family. I answered briefly, trying not to meet his eyes. When George went outside to get firewood for the fireplace, Mr. Smith suddenly said quietly, "Sophia, I recognized you right away." I looked up at him. There was so much pain and tenderness in his eyes that I almost burst into tears. "I never thought we'd meet again," I whispered. "Me neither," he smiled sadly. "But it seems fate decided otherwise." At that moment George came back in and the conversation stopped. I felt that the past I had been running from for so long was suddenly right beside me again. The next few days passed in a strange tension. Mr. Smith was polite and courteous with me, sometimes even joked, helped around the house, told stories from his youth. We cooked dinner together, discussed the garden. He asked about my work, and everything seemed as if there had never been anything between us but a light friendship. I tried to stay calm. With George, his father was also friendly, but sometimes I caught his long, searching look, as if he was trying to understand or decide something for himself. I didn't know what was happening between them until one evening I overheard their conversation. It happened in the evening when I went out onto the porch to water the flowers. They stayed inside. I heard George go upstairs and then muffled voices. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but Mr. Smith's words were so sharp that I froze. "George," he began, "you're an adult and I have no right to tell you who to be with. But you need to understand. Sophia is not the woman you need." "Why do you think that?" George sounded surprised, even hurt. "You don't know her past. You don't know what's in her heart. I don't want you to suffer later." "Dad, I'm an adult," George said firmly. "I'll decide for myself who I need. Sophia is a good person and I love her." "Love isn't everything," his father replied quietly but firmly. "Sometimes a person's past can destroy everything you're building. Think about it." I stood on the porch, clutching the watering can, feeling the cold inside. I knew Mr. Smith wasn't saying this for no reason. He remembered our past and he was uncomfortable. I understood that he was more worried about his reputation than about his son's fate. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. George was silent, thoughtful, but didn't say a word about the conversation with his father. I realized that a barrier had come between them, and that barrier was me. The next day Mr. Smith was friendly again, even overly so. He helped me with breakfast, talked about his plans, pretended nothing had happened. But I could no longer look at him the same way. I knew there was a lie behind his smile. In the evening, when George went to the store, Mr. Smith approached me on the veranda. "Sophia," he said quietly, "I don't wish you any harm. Just think about whether you should stay here. Sometimes it's better to leave in time than to cause pain later." "I'll think about it," I replied. Mr. Smith nodded, as if he had received exactly the answer he expected. At dawn I quietly packed my things. Baxter, sensing my mood, didn't leave my side. I stroked him and whispered, "Hang in there, my dear, everything will be all right." I didn't leave a note, didn't wake George. I just closed the door behind me, got in the car and drove away. The road was long and empty. I didn't cry, the tears seemed frozen inside. I just kept repeating to myself, this is for the best. For everyone. I knew George would wake up, not find me, call, search, but I couldn't do otherwise. I couldn't destroy his family, couldn't be the cause of someone else's pain again. The phone rang when I was already in my apartment. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Sophia, where are you? George's voice was anxious, almost frightened. What happened? Why did you leave? I gripped the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. George, I'm sorry. I can't be there anymore. This is better for both of us. Sophia, wait. I'll come, we'll talk. Don't come, I interrupted. Please. It's better if we don't see each other again. It's the right thing. You're a good man, you deserve happiness. Just forget me. Sophia, don't do this. There was pain in his voice that I didn't want to hear. Goodbye, George, I whispered and hung up. I sat on the floor, hugged Baxter, and for the first time in a long time I cried for real. I knew I was doing the right thing, but it didn't make it any easier. I chose loneliness so as not to ruin someone else's life. In the days that followed, I tried to get back to my usual routine. Workdays swallowed me up. Meetings, projects, reports, calls. I took on more than usual, stayed late at the office, leaving myself no time to think. My colleagues were surprised by my activity, but I just brushed it off, blaming urgent work. In the evenings, I returned to my empty apartment, where only Baxter greeted me. He rubbed against my legs, demanded attention, and only his presence reminded me that I wasn't completely alone. I tried not to think about the country house, about George, but the thoughts kept coming back, especially at night, when the city hummed outside and I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. George didn't give up. He called every day, sometimes several times. I didn't answer, but I saw his name on the screen, and my heart clenched with pain and guilt every time. He sent messages. Short, desperate, full of questions and pleas. I didn't reply to any of them. One evening after a long meeting, I saw his car by my building. George was standing by the door, holding a bouquet of wild daisies, the kind I loved. I froze in the shadows, watching him look up at my windows, hoping to see me. My heart pounded, but I couldn't go to him. I waited until he left, and only then went up to my apartment. The next day he was at my door again. He rang the intercom, knocked, called my name. I stood behind the door, pressing my forehead to the cold wood, listening to his voice, so familiar, so dear, so close and yet now so unreachable. I didn't open. I couldn't. This went on for several weeks. George didn't stop trying. He came, called, wrote. I lived in a fog, hiding from the past, from my feelings, from myself. I kept telling myself I was doing the right thing, that it was better for him, for his family, for everyone. But with each day, it became harder to breathe in this self-imposed prison. One day I stayed late at work. The office was almost empty. I was sitting at my computer trying to focus on another project, when I suddenly heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw George. He stood in the doorway, tired but determined. There was so much pain and hope in his eyes that I couldn't breathe. Sophia, he said quietly, please don't run away. Let me at least talk to you. I wanted to turn away, to say I was busy, that I had no time, but I couldn't. I just looked at him, unable to say a word. I can't do this anymore, George continued, coming closer. I can't live without you. I can't forget you no matter how much you ask. I don't care about your past. The only thing that matters is that I love you. I want to be with you no matter what. I lowered my eyes, feeling tears streaming down my cheeks. I had held on for so long, convinced myself I was doing the right thing. But now all my arguments crumbled to dust. George, I whispered, I didn't want to hurt you. I was afraid I'd ruin your family, that your father would never accept me. I'll deal with my father, he said firmly. This is my life, and I choose who to be with. I talked to him. He didn't understand at first, but that doesn't matter. The main thing is that I love you. And if you want to be with me, I'll never let you go again. I sobbed and he hugged me strongly, securely, the way only he could. I buried my face in his shoulder, feeling my exhaustion melt away and hope return. I love you, I whispered. Forgive me. It's all right, George smiled. We're together, and that's what matters. That evening, for the first time in a long while, I felt alive. I knew there would be challenges ahead, conversations, maybe arguments and reconciliations. But now I wasn't afraid. Because George was by my side and he had chosen me, no matter what. After that night, everything changed. George often came to see me, we walked around the city, went to the movies, met my friends. We talked a lot about the future. Made plans, dreamed of traveling, of a house with a garden and lots of light. But there was still one unresolved issue, George's father. I knew our relationship was a difficult test for him. I could sense that George worried about it, even if he didn't say so. I didn't push, didn't rush him, just stayed close. One day, at the end of autumn, George said he wanted to visit his father and have an honest conversation. I understood this was necessary and let him go with a light heart, though inside I was anxious. He came back late that evening, tired but with a new light in his eyes. I met him at the door and he hugged me right away. It's all right, he said. We talked. It wasn't easy, but he understood. He said he can't choose for me, and if I'm happy with you, that's my choice. I felt my last fear melt away. We sat in the kitchen, drank tea for a long time, and George told me how his father at first tried to argue, to persuade him, but then just got tired and gave up. He said he didn't want to lose his son, that life was too short for grudges and reproaches. A few days later, Mr. Smith called me himself. His voice was calm, even a little warm. Sophia, he said, I'd like you to come to dinner. Just to talk, without resentment or secrets. I agreed, and that evening became the start of a new chapter for all of us. We sat at the table, remembered the past, laughed, talked about the future. Time passed. George and I moved to a small house outside the city, planted a garden, got a dog. I kept working, but I no longer used work to run away from myself. We often visited Mr. Smith. He came to see us, gave advice, sometimes just sat with us on the porch, silent but at peace. I learned to forgive and accept. George learned to stand up for his happiness, and his father learned to let go of the past and rejoice for his son. We all became freer, closer to each other, and I knew. Now we truly had a future. Sometimes I thought about how things could have turned out differently. If I hadn't left, if George hadn't come after me, if his father hadn't found the strength to forgive. But now it didn't matter. We were together, and that was the most important thing. Life went on, calm, real, filled with love and trust. And I knew. Everything that happened led us exactly where we were meant to be. The story of Sophia, George, and his father is a tale of forgiveness, accepting the past, and learning to move forward despite fears and doubts. Each of them walked their own path. Some learned to let go, some to trust, and some to love again. It's important to remember that only we can decide who to be with and how to build our lives. The past shouldn't be a barrier to the future if there is love, honesty, and support in the present. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a comment about the characters' choices, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new and interesting stories.